you live from Johannesburg, South Africa, in LA, aka Lower Alberton. Hope that you all out there are doing well. Almost 6 months of lockdown. Can you imagine that? Such a time as this. We've been making it through one day at a time. For those of you that have become used to us hanging out like this with you, we want to say welcome on in such a time as this. And in the middle of this hour, over the next hour, it's our honor to have in studio with us Fasiha Hassan. Yes, some of you may recognize the name from hashtag Fees Might Fall. Many of you in most recent days will recognize her from her work that she's doing in Parliament. It's a great honor to have another colleague and friend that has already chosen a long way back for the side of justice, of equality, of restoration, of transformation. So if you're out there, friends, it's so awesome to be with you again on a beautiful afternoon like this in September. I hope your spring flavor is out to savor. My name is Seth Naika. It's my honor to host the show. And in the next hour, we'll be in conversation with Fasiha Hassan. I see she's already in studio. Well, still physically distanced, but using technology. Let's bring Fasiha on, not via posters, but in the person. Here we go. Hey, hey, hey.
Hi,
What's up?
hi, Sam. How are you?
Good, and you? How are you doing?
Yeah, it's already been a long day, but I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to have something, different than the usual meetings and constant backs and forths. So I'm really looking forward to it, actually.
So, Fasiha, let's show these people. When it's been a long day, coffee cups in hand, we're just going to
Yeah,
have some conversational fun with you all.
mine literally says coffee because adulting is hard. So I feel I'm quite apt because it's very true. It's very tough
Wow.
being an adult at this rate. So yeah.
Well,
But
life has taken us in different spaces since we were many years together on your campus, and I know you've moved along. For people that haven't been following all too closely, many have, but many that have not. Where are you at right now, if we may ask?
Yeah, so right now I'm the youngest member of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. So basically, I'm an MP for Gauteng. And I sit in 3 portfolio committees. So I sit in the Education Portfolio Committee, the Economic Development, which also includes agriculture, and then oversight of the Premier and the Legislature. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing now.
Wow, so it's in government and she's serving our people. Those of you that are paying attention to the conversation, we are here with Fasiha Hassan. And by way of being together, let me just catch up with you. How's family, how's life been going in such a time as this?
Yeah, I think we're all just taking it one day at a time. I think it can be very overwhelming otherwise. But my family is okay. We've had a few people who are COVID positive. Like everyone, we've also lost a few elders. But we have to carry on, we have to take it day by day. So, just praying and trying to be safe. And yeah, how's your family, Seth?
Yeah, well, firstly, condolences to family members that have been lost. We fortunately within our nuclear family, for those of you that are listening out there, we got to talk about it in that way. But in the closer to nuclear family, there haven't been anybody passing away, but in our community and our relatives, there have been. And so, yeah, but by and large, we've been okay. We're doing okay. The babies are doing well. And life is busy at home, as you can imagine, but grateful to do this work. We've had to recreate ourselves in these ways, and thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the nice things about COVID, that, we've been forced to bring ourselves into the modern day and in 2020. So even a lot of the old guard that I work with, like now they know how to mute and unmute themselves and how MS Teams works and Zoom. So, it's quite cute because I think they think they're subject matter experts, even though they only discovered it maybe 3-4 months ago, But that's also been nice to see that people are adapting. People, the human spirit, right? You have to, you sink or you swim.
Yeah, I mean, what's been interesting in our community in Southside Joburg, I work with a few elders in the community. I think March 18th for some of them, not in the context of their professional life, but linked to our faith-based community life. It was the first meeting they had to have online together with us on March 18th, because lockdown was coming on March 26th. And yeah, you're quite right. People have become now used. Zoom is their next best friend. They've learned about Twitter. They've learned about Instagram. So it's a whole new world. And in some ways, I think Churchill once said, don't waste a good crisis. So it's been just the human spirit. You're quite right, Fasiha, to explore, find out new ways, adapt, survive has been amazing. And from our Southside community, I've been blessed, and I can say to you, Fasiha, people's generosity has just been outstanding. There's yes, the economic realities of COVID-19 has further exacerbated the 20 plus million people that have been without jobs, and people that have been living on less than a 1,000 rand a month. So COVID has brought that, but also we've seen people arising with generosity and care and willing to come alongside. How about you and the community that you are part of?
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I've been proud of, especially, the Muslim community sometimes can be a bit odd in when they choose when to get involved and not. And I was just very proud, especially throughout the beginning of lockdown, like people getting so hands-on in our community, and not just, I mean, in the extended South African community is what I mean. And I was really proud of that. And I think, if anything, they should learn that we can't just exist amongst ourselves. We need to exist in a greater society and understand that we're only as strong as our most weak or most vulnerable member. So in that sense, I agree with you. I think we've seen, some of the best and the worst of humankind, but at the same time, I'm glad that we've seen some of the best of it, and what we can hold on to moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the worst circumstances, just by way of catching up with you, I'll say to you, Marisha and we did an online conference in August with Via Christi Community Church and some other partners, and we had not it wasn't thousands of attendees, but we had 40 people that took time to be a part of a gender-based focused learning conference. And 40 people from South Africa and around SA, and even international delegates as well, joined us in this conversation, largely from religious communities. So there we partnered with Heartlines, and in the south of Joburg, in Lenasia South, Marisha and I have been working with a group of women known as Ladies of Wisdom. They kind of just got together about 6-7 years ago, and actually we said, no, we got to honor you. We know that you kind of just mothers in the community that have created a space. But what a beautiful space where for the last 2 years, they have been running their own conferences for women and women's rights. And then we connected with them and brought them as a part of this. So we had about 40 delegates online. And in light of all the negative stuff that's been happening in the country, there were some amazing speakers that addressed, gender-based violence and from their own personal stories, how they've been choosing to heal. And then we've had some men folk as well join along from our community and speak out about the injustices. So I don't want to be too proud of the South Side heritage I have here in Johannesburg, but I have to say that it's a beautiful culture. There's a beautiful heritage of togetherness, and while Ubuntu seems to be fleeting, I've seen again, people be reminded that the best part of our humanity and human dignity can come forward. And so even in the craziness of gender-based violence, I'm happy to say, Fasiha, I've seen people stepping out with some great learnings, and hopefully this ability to see a shift in our culture around these issues.
Yeah, definitely. If there was a moment for change in our lifetimes, it's now. COVID's given us that opportunity of, kind of like a factory reset. So we need to utilize that in the best possible manner, to keep what's good and to remove what's bad from our personal lives, yes, of course, but also from society as well.
Well, Fasiha, thank you for taking the time. When Fasiha says she's busy, friends, I want you to know that it's really and seriously true that she's been busy. But over the last 2 months, we've been doing this prep to get to this place. And I want to say thank you for managing your calendar. But it's a world that you're handling all at the whiz with technology on your side, the savviness in what you're doing. And we are proud of you. In Joburg South, I know many people who know you and know the heritage of your family and what you did. I'm grateful and honored that you can take this time. So friends, like we do, let me pay respects to Fasiha. like we do with other leaders. And the best way I know how is to actually just take a moment. So if you're around the world and you get access, because we know we have some guests coming in from the States and so on, Fasiha Hassan is a leader in our country. And I got to know Fasiha just by way of my personal connection to her, was when I was also on campus, not as a student. She was as a student. We came there as, I think they cloaked us with these peacemaking, bandanas that we had to be around while it was hot on campus at Wits University. And it was negotiated compromise. We obviously were not there to steal any light from the power of our students. Those of you that didn't follow that movement, it has been likened unto the 1976. In some way, the 76 of our time. And Fasiha, together, like I know, she's always recognized the colleagues that have been with her, much in the Nelson Mandela tradition. It's not just about me, it's about us. That she took a lead with and amongst others to talk around Fees Must Fall, and she can say a word about it. But for me, being there, seeing a person, and now to be more iconic in this way, to see a woman leader taking her role and her place in a campus situation, and also leading people through with courage. So let me read about Fasiha Hassan. Fasiha is a South African lawyer, politician, and previous student activist. I'd like to make one edit there right now. I think she'll never let student activism let go of her. She's rooted in it, so these guys must do an edit on the profile. Hassan was SRC leader during the Fees Must Fall protests at the University of Witwatersrand. She was a law student at the time. In May 2019, at the age of 25, she became the youngest member of the Gauteng provincial legislature. Hassan is a member of the African National Congress. And now when I must address her more formally, I have to say the Honorable Fasiha Hassan. As the youngest member in this space of the legislature, focuses on her life being a life that is established to distinguish her work in student leadership, but more than that, becoming the first woman chairperson of the Muslim Students Association at Wits University in 2013. She has occupied various political spaces, including as deputy president of the SA Union of Students. When we think about your inspiration, this is what people are writing about you in your profile. Hassan received both a BCom degree and an LLB from Wits University and was awarded the 29 Student Peace Prize, a Norwegian prize awarded to student activists dedicated to non-violent social justice. Dear friend, I don't know how you did all of that while keeping Fees Must Fall let go, but you made it happen. In case you didn't know, this is important to say. Hassan is a Muslim woman at the forefront of a new political era in SA history, often connecting her faith with her activism, as both are built on a foundation that deliberately advocates for social justice. She took her oath of public office under her own sentimental and religious law of the Quran, gifted to her by her parents from the Hajj pilgrimage, when she was sworn in as a member of the Gauteng legislature. Dear friends, this is the Honorable Fasiha Hassan. Fasiha, how did I do?
You did very well. The terminologies of honorable, they're there, but we don't have to use them. They're so, dissociated from us. So just Fasiha is good for me.
Cool stuff. And as you can see, coffee cup in hand, I'll be sticking with that as well. Fasiha, life has taken you in many spaces. How has it been in this new space? Before we get to the story moment, please tell us, as South Africans, what does it feel like to be in this new place of serving government as an MP? And how have you adapted? Has there been challenges? Has it been difficult? Has it been with ease? What's been going on?
Yeah, so I'm in the legislature. So technically, a lot of people get a little bit confused, right? We have the executive, which are like ministers and the president and MACs. They do the implementation work, and then we do the policy work, which is a little bit different. So a lot of people will think, oh well, we're in government departments, we deal with that day to day, and that's not the case. But yeah, so I'm in the legislature. To be honest, I think initially, and to some extent even now, it's a bit of a baptism of fire. It was one of those things where, there's not many young people in the space. That's something we have to change. But because of that, you sort of, everyone around you kind of already knows what to do and you don't. So having to learn very simple swim kind of thing. But if I look back now that you mentioned the different things that have happened over the last few years, I guess that's always been the case in my life, right? You just get thrown into a situation and you do your best to make it work. So that's kind of a little bit of what's been going on. But I must be honest, I've learned so much. We've only been in office now over a year, and I've learned an incredible amount about how to do things, how to get service delivery done faster, but also about, like, there's three main things we do in legislature, right? It's oversight of government. So like we have portfolio committees that make sure these government departments are meant to do their, or how they do their work. Then we also have what we call lawmaking. So we actually create laws and legislation. And the third thing we do is what we call public participation. So linking the public and linking people like you and me who are generally not necessarily access to government politicians, but to be your voice in parliamentary spaces, in policy making spaces. So I've also just learned a lot about how everything works, and good and bad days. I have to be honest. It's like in any other job, you have days where things work out really well, and days where you want to bash your head into a wall. And that's kind of the honest truth of it. It's not all glamorous. I think people think it is, but it's a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights, a lot of time away from home. But that's the life that we chose. So, at least it's for a greater cause.
Now, one of the things on this broadcast that we promised our listeners was, I said to them, because when people would hear about social justice or righting the wrongs, they'll say, "Where are the folk?" And I said, one of the areas in my life that I've been blessed by is to have friends and colleagues that have already, whether they've risen to some kind of notoriety or not, even before they were known, they kind of made a commitment, either through their religious practices or their community identification. We've grown up in a culture and a space where people have been for a long time, committed to seeing who are on the other side of the railway tracks. What's going on with people who are living with their backs against the wall? And so others might call it social justice. And so, Fasiha, how do you see that? And you've already mentioned a little bit about your work in the educational portfolio as well as economic relief factors. But how do you see it connecting with your social justice focus, which has been part of your life, part of your journey?
Exactly. I think for me, if there's a common thread through everything and what the bigger picture really is social justice, right? And it seems like an airy-fairy term about, people that I think just don't see the linkages around it. But the fact is that we live in a highly unequal society, especially in South Africa, where you don't even have to travel that far and you'll see extreme poverty. And that's not something that can sit well with any of us. It needs to be something that a collective sort of process that we push to ensure that people have the opportunities, right? So that people like yourself and myself are not the only people who can live in homes and send our kids to good schools, etc., etc., etc. So for me, that's always been the underlying thing, and it will always be the underlying thing, whether this political thing works out or not. If this doesn't work out, I'm going to be a public interest human rights lawyer. So for me, no matter where I find myself in, and I've said this before on other public platforms, that where will you find your life's purpose and your life calling? That's this activism and fighting for social justice and for equality amongst people, and not just in writing, right? We have a good constitution, you entitled to all these things, right, to housing, water, but it has to be real, it has to be tangible. And if we're being honest, that's not the case, at least not enough. And I'm hoping that's what my life is going to be about, like the constant pursuit of justice.
Wow. It's kind of my own way of making the connection. You gotta find the practice with the preach. And I love the way that the Constitution is there. It can only be beautiful if it's also put into practice. Yes, it's a beautiful written document. People celebrate our Constitution as South Africa around the world, but we've got to see it coming through. I'm reminded of a colleague of mine because a few years ago, when Mahalia just turned 1, I was invited to India and I traveled to Bangladesh. Yes, and I met an organization called International Justice Mission, IJM. And their main focus of work was really to address what would be known in India as bonded slavery, or bonded work, bonded labor, I should say, not slavery, I should say bonded labor. Because the remarkable issue is, what's ironic, is people who are in this laboring force don't really know their rights. So you'll get a mother who's working from 3 o'clock in the morning at a rubble site, moving boulders on a head with like a kind of a metal old school bin lid that we used to have in South Africa. And around her are the children who are not schooling, but they're working from 3 in the morning and it'll go like to 11 at night. And then they just get to sleep. What is their exchange or the contract? A piece of bread and a few shillings to get by. So I was enthused by this work, and I went over into Bangladesh and got to know more about IJM. And just to know that this lawyer, Mrs. Abrams, was really, her work was focused on just teaching people their rights. This is your right. This is what you can do within your rights and what you shouldn't be doing within your rights. And so as I think upon it, how do we then take the beautiful constitution that we have and make it practical and make it work? Yes, so social justice folk out there, if you haven't made your life about social justice, you are all welcome, especially in the context of our South Africa. We are all welcome here. Fasiha, at this time, maybe one more word and then we're going to cross the video, but I can see you have something to say.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, not everybody, when we talk about social justice, people think you need to be very politically involved, you must choose a political party, etc. That's not the only way that you can pursue social justice, right? You can do it in your own community, in your own home. And I say this all the time, find what you're good at and what you love doing and use that to build your society. If that's tutoring on a Saturday morning in a local school, if you love soccer, go and coach an underprivileged team. There's ways in which you can do this that don't mean that you must be like a politician, right? I want to dispel this idea immediately. You can be yourself, do what you love, and help society at the same time.
Beautiful. There's a person who comes to mind, John Formink. Well, he's again now well known for his mathematician brilliance. But he spoke about his kind of commitment, that in his area of Athlone, he would teach mathematics at his church hall for the whosoever, whether you were Christian, Muslim, Hindu, anyone in Athlone could come. But that was his return to his community, and he taught those lessons for free. So like Fasiha is saying today, those of you that are out there, please consider what is it that you can do with the little or the much that you have in your hand for the purposes of closing the gaps, for the purposes of ensuring that we have a better life for all. In this COVID-19 time, we've seen in our own Joburg South existence, people trying to do with the little or the much that they had to help people close the gaps. Friends, at this moment, I want to cut away. Fasiha and I will take a rest from the screen just for 2 minutes to kind of line up this next moment. The next moment is about story, and you may know Fasiha from what has been written about her, or you may know her from your online engagement. Some of you may know her from Fees Must Fall. Some of you may know her from her ENCA work. There's many spaces, but this next moment will allow us to get, if you like, the story behind the story. And how we're going to do that is with a video from a national campaign called What's Your Story, which has been mobilized by the organization Heartline. So let's check this out together. And when we're back with Fasiha taking a moment about her story with us.
My story begins in a little place called Lihurutsi.
I was named after a character from Dallas because my mom was so obsessed with the show.
My story begins in KwaZulu-Natal. I was born at RK Khan's hospital.
I was born with bronchitis and I spent the first 4 weeks of my life in the hospital.
I grew up in a village, an hour's drive away from Rustenburg CBD.
Growing up in the township was fun.
I grew up in a white neighborhood. Myself and my neighbors, we were the only black family on that street.
I started dancing when I was 3 years old.
I learned Tswana at a very young age, and by now the only words that I can actually remember were swear words.
My English teacher happened to be Indian. and he is one of the people that played the biggest role in my life.
I was the new girl at school, and initially nobody wanted to be my friend.
Enrolling at varsity was a bit of a struggle also on its own, in that I had good marks but I had no money.
I was the first person to graduate in my family.
I got a really nice job in a bank and progressed quite rapidly through the ranks.
So I understand if I wasn't white, I wouldn't be where I am today.
I met white people for the first time in an operating room. What was weird is that they spoke Sesotho and I could understand what they were saying.
The first time I saw a white man was during the apartheid system, and they were chasing us out of schools with guns. It was policemen in uniform.
It took a lot of courage to resist going to the army at the risk of going to jail, and I didn't have that courage, so I just went with the flow.
I remember asking my dad, but why can they come to our beach? As if we had a beach.
Telling my story made me feel very emotional, and it took me back to my past. But then I'm happy now because people know me for who I really am.
I was inspired to become a better person because it spoke about how she allowed healing to take place in her life.
Listening to people's stories made me realize that I shouldn't judge people based on first impressions, but that I should take time to listen and dig a little bit more.
His story.
Her story.
My story.
What's your story?
Beautiful campaign over the last 7 years in the work that I do around reconciliation, diversity. I have been favored to draw from some of the resource pool of resources that have been created by the organization Heartlines and their partners. The story freshening. I'm in studio with Fasiha Hassan. Those of you that may come on even just yet, please enjoy this next moment as we take a spotlight on the story of Fasiha Hassan. Fasiha, you still doing okay?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm enjoying sipping on my coffee, and I must say it's really nice to catch up with you after a long while. I'm feeling quite relaxed and enjoying this time of conversation with you.
Yeah, and it's full circle, from our days of hectic things at Feesman's Fall and on the ground to a much more calmer kind of situation. So for that, I'm appreciative. So I don't always put you in difficult positions.
Yeah, and I am grateful for that. Fasiha, we just watched a video called What's Your Story? It's kind of the primer for this next moment. But before we get into it, what did you observe as you just watched that video with us?
I found it interesting. I didn't quite expect to hear a little bit from the white people. I mean, the guy who was trying to resist conscription but ended up going. I found that quite interesting. And the other guy who also acknowledged his privilege. And then the one last sort of big thing that I noticed was the woman who talked about her first interaction with a white man being a policeman chasing them out of school. And her way in which she said it, she was smiling and kind of laughing, but it shows us that we've never been taught to deal with the trauma of violent racism. That we never really acknowledge what it did to us. When some people are in a difficult position or they feel uncomfortable, they laugh or they want to make light of it because that's how they deal with it. And when I saw that, I thought about that because, especially now with the clicks thing, it sort of brings back a lot of emotions, and I just found that interesting as well.
Yeah, I watched Chantal Whittle's ENCA 2 minutes and 50 seconds of an amazing, what I would call could be sweet poetry in such a time as this, of someone who
like a lot of, she really, I think, put it in the right context, especially for people who are privileged and don't really have the sort of pain of being a person of color, etc. I thought that she put it together really well, and in a way that I would think lots of people would relate to and understand. So in fact, I saved it when I saw it on social media because I thought it was so pertinent.
Yeah, and if anyone's out there and you know how to get the copy of that video, the 2 minutes and 50 seconds, that could be a TED Talk right there. Right there could be a TED Talk right there of a beautiful way in which Chantal just spoke about living in a racialized society. Now today, I have a lot more straighter hair than it looks, and I don't want to make light of the issue, But if one would consider in our own context, even a matter such as the pencil test, can you imagine people's racial identity being designed according to a pencil test? So yeah, just to say to us that this cliques matter is a matter that we need to get deeper with. We need to get to better understanding. And it means for those of us who are coming from privileged parts of the society to begin to enter into the life of Black dialogue, of Black people's lives and stories. Fasiha, you wanted to say?
Yeah, like, I think let me start on the pencil test, that it's not just about hair. And I think that's maybe what people had missed. That because we come from a system where a pencil test could decide your livelihood and your entire fate, like economically, socially, just by virtue of what a pencil did in your hair. And I think that's also what some people have missed, right? That it's not about the campaign particularly, it's about what it means and about how it continues to teach us that being Black, being people of color, that we're inferior. It's an inherent thing that you sort of, especially, and we can speak about this in the Indian community, and I want to maybe reference, I don't know if people have seen there's a Bollywood movie that came out, and the song that sort of references Beyonce. And Beyonce did a whole thing about Black is beautiful, she did this whole beautiful ensemble around celebrating Blackness. And then you have this Bollywood song that sort of goes, this girl's so fair in complexion, Beyonce should be ashamed. And then you just like face palm. You're like, people have really just missed the point here, right? That we're trying and we're pushing to not just have these discussions in political spaces, but have these discussions across the board. And ultimately, and hopefully, bring about some more change. Because if we're being honest, there's huge problems in our communities, huge problems of racism. I know growing up as a kid, yes, I'm light in complexion, but I used to like playing outside, and I used to get very sunburnt and tan. And members of my extended family being horrified to be like to my parents, why doesn't she wear sunblock? Look at how black she's becoming, as an insult. And how we have to call that up. We have to call that out in our communities. Otherwise, nothing is ever going to change.
And this idea that we need to deconstruct those matters of what beauty is. So for those of us that, and as Fasiha has just referenced, we say that in the Indian community can be as diverse as religious diversity, race diversity, people that would be Indian and have a lot more Malay heritage, people that would be Indian and actually have heritage as first people from India, people that would be Indian in Unit 2 versus people that are Indian in the Western Cape. Now imagine if I had to explore that same diversity right across the country in the blackness of our world and our African diaspora. So it just kind of enriches the conversation. Thank you, Fasiha, for taking us there. Let's take a moment. Friends, this idea of the What's Your Story is really that Fasiha is allowed in the next 4 moments to let us into her space of the story behind the story. Who is Fasiha Hassan? And Fasiha, obviously we don't have your whole life of the many years you've been living and your entire career. But what have you prepped for us today as we talk about your personal story, where you've come from, where you're at, and maybe in some way of where you're planning to go? So over to you as we take a moment to listen.
It was a bit difficult to sort of prepare this, especially because there is a lot of information out there, but it's always a thing of what do I think is important for people to kind of know. So I think the starting point, my parents were actually activists in the 1980s in the UDF, and they got very involved. And the reason why I cite this is because I was very lucky to grow up in a home in which activism was prioritized and was very important. And even yesterday I was chatting to a friend, and it's just an interesting thing that people don't know about. But because, this is the idea of the segment, right? Learn things that you don't know about me. When I was a kid, I really wanted a Barbie. And my mom was very specific. She didn't want me to have a Barbie because she felt that, it would, she didn't say this in these words, but, that it would have, the representation of what Barbie is: blonde hair, blue eyes, light skin, and that like subscription to whiteness and beauty, and those sorts of ideas. And I remember at one of my birthday parties, somebody finally gifted me a Barbie, and I was so happy and excited. But my mom quietly being like, okay, it's fine, we'll allow it. But now at 26, because that's how old I am, I'm actually very grateful for my mom having done that, because you don't realize as a kid how you internalize these things, right? A lot of people tend to think kids are just going with the flow. They're actually very intuitive, and they're absorbing information and knowledge, even the unspoken things, all the time. And I think if my parents were not as particular as they were in enforcing this idea of equality and lack of prejudice, etc., into me, I probably would have had a very different life. And I went to a good school. I went to a school called Sacred Heart. I don't know if anyone knows it. It's an observatory. It's a Catholic school, actually, but it was a very progressive Catholic school. So at the beginning of Maths, we'd have like an interfaith prayer with like the Hindu kids, the Muslim kids, the Jewish kids would all like, do a little interfaith prayer before. And that actually was interesting in that I kind of learned a lot about reconciliation growing up. And then when I got to Wits in the big world, I realized none of that's happening in society. So as much as I went to a school where it was very diverse, very mixed race, very, we all had friends of different racial groups and hanging out and all that kind of thing, got to university and realized, well, hey, that's not society. And that's also where my conscientization really happened. Yes, throughout high school, but particularly in university. And then I suppose, the rest is now history, right? Fighting against increments of fees, fighting against inequality in higher education, and then ultimately, not really planning it, but ultimately being able to come here, be a public representative, be amongst the youngest in the country, but also to, the same role we played during Christmas Fall, in many ways we have to play now, which is to say the things that are uncomfortable to say, that people don't want to hear about, to really raise the mirror up to society. And that's been challenging. I'm not gonna lie, it's been quite challenging. And maybe the last thing safe to say is that I sometimes feel like I didn't, or I haven't had a normal youth. When people were going out on Friday nights and having fun, we were in those SRC offices, we were planning campaigns. Even now, we work most weekends, and I look at my peers who are of a similar age, and I often think to myself, sure, that's these are things that I might be missing out on. So, that's not something I've actually spoken about on a public platform before, but it is something that I'm feeling now, because, you look at all the things you've left behind, or the things that you've sacrificed, and that's been an interesting one, especially because now lockdown is easier. People are starting to go out, and I'm just like, oh, I guess maybe I've missed the boat. I don't know, because I have less of an interest now of being out and about on a Friday, Saturday night, and mostly because I'm tired. So maybe I've just become an overnight auntie. That's my greatest fear. And recently I bought a chair, like a study chair, and I haven't taken the plastic off it. I'm going to be honest with everybody, because I feel like if I take the plastic off, it's going to get messed up. So I'm a 26-year-old auntie who, at this rate, is on the fast track to being one of those.
Wow. Well, Fasiha, not that I'm, too many years. Well, I guess enough years ahead of you to simply say, one has got to work out how we keep that balance of doing the work and then also bringing in the fun of life. We can be busy. And I think that's some of the work that we've been afforded to do with some other justice activists that have gone ahead of us, is to find the space that, yes, you got to work hard at the work that we're doing and be true for justice, but then also you got to take those breaks, got to find fun in the craziness. And in my own biblical tradition, via humor, you got to find the humor in the craziness. But I said to people, can you imagine, like, here were these Hebrew slaves under, at that time, Egyptian rule, and at one part of the text, it kind of says to you that, they were just a small group of people. But later on, from what one would call Genesis to Exodus, the same group of people ended up being 1 million plus. So I reflect on them and say, listen, even in the worst circumstances, people had to, get jiggy with it. They had to have some celebration. They had love. They had romance. They made babies. So, but yet they were living in the most ridiculous circumstances. And so, that kind of just sobers out. But I want to say thank you for just taking that moment about your story with us. And it's true that, in some way it links to your heritage. It links to where you will also, I guess, with your family, work out a rhythm of well-being. As you think upon your heritage and your story today, there's much that you've said, but what's one of the key values that has been threaded through I mean, it's come out through the Barbie reality of your mom guiding you, towards a certain perspective. But as you think upon, this journey till this point of 26, what's one of the key values that you can share with us from your story as you think upon your heritage and your well-being?
I think the word that would come to mind is resilience, and it's not just my parents. So many of us, our grandparents, if you think of what they went through, coming from India here, the difficulties they faced, and I mean, if I look at my grandparents, I think only one of them got a matric. And interestingly enough, was my grandmother, my mom's mom. My grandfather later got a matric, but effectively she was the first one. And how they fought incredibly hard to give us the life that we have, but also that focus on education, right? That thing of saying, this is your way out. This is how you're going to change your life. And I was, reflecting, COVID makes you reflect on your life and where you found yourself. But this thing of resilience has really been, entrenched in me, and also being hardworking, in a sense that no matter where I've gone, I've proved myself through hard work. And let me put it in context, right? When you're the youngest person at the table, I'm not just the youngest one, I'm also this intersection of being a woman, and I'm a Muslim woman. There's all of these different layers, right? And often people don't take you as seriously as they should. And one of the ways, whether it was in the student movement or now, or even when I had a short stint in corporate as a lawyer, one of the ways in which I gained respect and I showed people what I could do was through hard work, and was through that resilience that, there'll be days and moments where you really want to give up, but those are the moments in which you really have to push through and persevere. Because imagine, Seth, if we did give up, we wouldn't have some level of education now. NASFIS would still be a low grant. We wouldn't have changed the history of this country. And more importantly, imagine if South Africans were not courageous, we'd still be in apartheid, because no one would have ever fought back. So in many ways, resilience, it beats through the body. It's in our blood, this thing of constantly being able to pick ourselves up. And if there's one thing I've learned, is that life will knock you down, and if you can pick yourself up and dust yourself off, then you're going to be okay. As much as it doesn't necessarily seem like at the moment, you're going to be fine, because of that ability to survive. Yeah.
Wow, resilience. Fasiha Hassan speaking to us about a value that's drawn out of a story as we think resilience. Fasiha, I want to set in motion this next few moments that we have together. And I want to do that through a video that I've brought with me. It's a word called Sankofa. Those out of you that are out there, when I was in the States, I actually went on a week journey with Marisha and I, being married at that time for about 6 years. Mahalia was not born, but she was in the bus with us. And we went on a ride in the southern states, and actually had what was beautiful about it, I went through all of the journeys that Dr. King would have been in. The Trail of Tears. I walked across the bridge that he walked. We ended up going to the King Center in Alabama. And out of that tradition, but not just the American civil rights movement, more especially the African connection to Sankofa. Let's watch this video together. And in this moment, we'll go through this thread of thought leadership in conversation around the focus of heritage and well-being. A well-being of economy, a well-being of politics, a well-being of being anti a culture of irregular violence. How do we see this come into play? So let's have a look at this video together. Well, there we have it. Sankofa. Thinking about the connection of heritage and well-being. I'm in studio with Fasiha Hassan. Fasiha, I love just this context and the concept of Sankofa. We've used it in our planning, in our consultations. I've even used it in some of the work that we've done with some of our corporate consulting, where we get people to think upon the past from whence we've come, where we find ourselves currently, and where we'd like to be. As you reflect with me today on heritage and well-being, what is a critical reflection that is front of mind for Fasiha?
Yeah, so on the well-being, and okay, I'll be able to link it to heritage. One of the things we often neglect, I think, is our mental health. And it's very much linked to our heritage, because I don't know about you, but we come from communities that don't necessarily take seriously enough mental health. The idea that depression is not taken as seriously as it should, or that you pray about it, that will be sufficient, without acknowledging that maybe you need a psychiatrist or medical intervention, or even just the idea that we're allowed to take a moment. We also live in the social media age where there's so much information, you're constantly online. There's never a moment where there's silence, and there's never a moment in which you just exist in that very moment. And at the beginning of this year, it's interesting. Obviously, we didn't know about COVID, but December, January, I took like a social media cleanse. So I didn't delete my account. Unfortunately, I can't. But what I did is I just didn't post and I didn't look at it. And it was so beautiful to go to a space and take a picture for the moment, to enjoy what it was, as opposed to being so worried about putting it on my Insta story or my Facebook story, or being able to share that moment. I could just enjoy it. And I think sometimes we're so concerned about how our imagery or our aesthetic comes across online that we miss genuine moments of interaction with people, with spaces, with scenery, with nature, and I think this is not something we've really unpacked. We might only see this problem 10 or 20 years from now, but what does that do to the human soul? When you're not connected? Yes, you're connected, right? We're always connected with our phones, but are we connected to our societies, to human beings? And are we living our true selves? I mean, that's another thing that we're all a little bit guilty of, right? Over emphasizing a particular type of lifestyle, where in reality life is tough. And I think sometimes people forget, or you think, oh, wow, this person's doing really well, but in reality life is tough. People just don't post about the bad moments.
Yeah, and I think that's been important. I think after this COVID-19, we're going to really have to work out how we do life with synchronous, asynchronous living, this online well-being. I mean, we've been physically distanced as we have for the last 6 months, and many folk have been saying, how have you Africans managed it? Because yes, we are much more relational people. Yeah. We like hanging out. We do more community stuff. Whether we got money or don't have money, there's always a bring and share happening. And here people have had to resolve to just doing online life. And right now, I know, Fasiha, even today, people have been mentioning, how tired they are of Zooming. They're tired of webinaring. They're webinaring out. It's like we have a kasi word say, "Ye mag me nar, man." I'm getting nar with it, meaning just to say that it's not giving me a good flavor. I'm feeling upset about it, but just to say that we need to get to that space of what will well-being look like in our own space and place. Fasiha, the other thing that we talk about here is what's disrupting us, and I'll add to this, and then you can maybe tagline with it. But I am feeling disrupted by factors that are happening in my society. Like, I have to be honest, the clicks reality, how some people are missing it again, how the reality is it becomes a racial dialogue, because it is, and it's a reality of a systemic injustice, and how these kind of conversations get up and loaded in light of the political situation. And what has the country done well at, what haven't we done at? It's kind of disrupting me in my own space to wonder and say, well, I thought in 20 years of doing the work that I've done, we would have been at a better place. And I don't want to all of the work that we have done. I want to acknowledge that some beautiful moments have been landed. But sometimes it does feel like, we've done so much and we haven't gone that far. We still have so much more to do. So that's been in my space. I can say that's been like a disruptive, element of how do we reorganize? How do we restrat? How do we rework and return to maybe what needs to be engaged versus unconscious bias? We may need to go back just to basic education around anti-racism, the racism issues, because that's where we came from, and begin a learning process again. But what's become more a reality that we need to have a continuation of our learning, a mapping of our learning. Like one of the things I've done in the communities I've served, whenever I could, I made 1976 that connection to the youth uprising. When we could, every June without fail, we take a group of youth and adults to the memorial. Make it a part of our dialogue, not to be ashamed of it, not to run away from it. Not that we want to remember the pain only, but that we commemorate the lives that were lost, plus reflect on where we need to be in our future. So that's one of the disruptive elements that I'm finding right now. How about you?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because COVID's shown us that there's some things in our society we most certainly have to change, but it's also kind of shone a light on what's really important. And you were thinking or talking about what's been disruptive. I think there's positives and benefits to it, right? Because COVID's inherently disruptive. So one of the things in my own personal life that I have found useful is often I struggle to say no to certain social activities for the reason I mentioned earlier, right? The fact that I feel like I'm not doing enough youthful, fun things. And the wonderful thing about COVID is there was no pressure to agree to go out or to, it was always on my terms. And the nice thing, though, the thing I want to carry out from that, as much as it was very disruptive to one's social life, you can now be a lot more selective about who you share your energy with and who you share your time with. Because one of the things I think we mistake is we think everybody is our friends. We have friends and we have acquaintances, but you don't always have your inner circle is different. And it's something I've also had to learn because a lot of people want to be around us for a number of different reasons, whether it's proximity or whatever, but it's been a very good filter for me in many ways, a disruptive filter, but a filter that's shown me who my real friends are, who are people I can rely on in a supportive way. There's a lot more coming out of it. And it's not a reflection I've actually heard from other people, but it is something that I've experienced in addition to what everyone else has also gone through. But that's been an interesting thing as well, to be able to filter out where I should be spending time and where I shouldn't. And the ability to say no is a new thing that I'm also having to learn. And maybe it's also a thing that, I'm sure you relate. There's so many people who always need things from us, right? Especially when you're an activist in your community. You don't say no on those levels, but you inherit that same thing in your personal life as well. And so you never spend enough time looking after yourself. And that's been something that's been good for me, to just say, well, I'm going to take a moment, take a step back, breathe. Right, where am I? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And that very important why. And if there's nothing there's no benefit from it, and I'm not talking about financial benefit, I'm talking inner peace kind of benefit. If it doesn't bring about that, and it's not sort of social justice related, then I don't think I need to do it. And that's a big lesson that I've had to learn from this whole process.
Beautiful. I like that whole theming of the inner circle. Who will be my inner circle? Because not everybody can become that inner circle kind of people. Not to say that you want to execute and leave people feeling marginalized, but who energizes me? Practically, I'll tell you, I'm so happy that when level 2 came about, we could return to playing some football. There's a group of folk that I hang out with on Saturday early morning. It energizes me. It allows me to just be in a space where I don't have to do, just all mind mapping and thinking and hard stuff. Well, hey, life is what it is, but it's a place that it's an inner circle that has been created for me, where I'm a part of people, and maybe things will shift and move. But again, how we build this heritage and well-being of where do I need to be and where do I not need to be? When can I say I'm going to give my time and when can I take some time back? Fasiha, I know that in one of your portfolios, you look at economic issues, and I kind of would like to lean into that space as we think about action and service and hopefully what can be a better future. Because many folks say, hey, if life could go back, I'm hoping that for the sake of the poor, we wouldn't go back to life, before March. That we'd find a new way to angle how we do justice and economic upliftment and economic enfranchisement of those that are largely still marginalized in this economy. So I was looking at, Kate Raworth in her work of donut economics, and I know, I've said it a few times on the show, and I'm doing more reading around it, but around thinking of a new economy, a new social imagination. Emmanuel Katangola, when he reflected on the Rwanda genocide, his title was, of that book was about a new social imagination, not going back to the way things were. And Keith Raworth in Donut Economics speaks about, this economics that sets into place sustainability, equitability, justice. And just to say that it is working, because Holland, as Amsterdam as a city, has adopted this economic outlook. I mean, when you see your work today, as you think upon action and service, what is it that we can do to create a new social imagination around economic issues, justice issues related to a better access, a better equitability for our people?
It's interesting you should say these things, because it's something that's been very deeply embedded in my mind from around March, around how do we utilize this moment, or this break in both in economics but in society, but how do we utilize it for the benefit of the poor? And I've also started to pick up a few different books. I mean, I did study economics in my econ, but you learn very fast that what you study at university isn't always as practical as it should be. But yes, so now, as a policymaker, I'm asking the exact same questions. How do we bring about a more sustainable economy, but more importantly, an inclusive one? And one of the big things that we are pushing, especially on a Gauteng level, it's difficult for me to speak about other provinces, but particularly here, is around supporting small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, supporting what we would call the township economy. So let me unpack on that, because I think it's useful to what we're talking about. Right now we're seeing the center of the economy kind of in Sandton, right? It's very well built up. It's a beautiful place. There's job opportunity, etc., etc., etc. And what's happened is another element of spatial apartheid, that people living in your Lens, your Eldorado Park, your Soweto are not benefiting from just not just services, but from that economic life. And what we talk about the township economy. It's about, instead of just creating jobs in Sandton, we want to be able to create jobs and economic meaning in our communities where we exist already. So the idea is that we're not going to just transform the city center, which is fast becoming Sandton, not even town. How do we transform that to be something in which our people can get a meaningful life? Whether that be, yes, through jobs, but also through what we buy, right? How often do we know people who go to Sandton City, to the mall, for an example, when they're looking to do their shopping, instead of doing their shopping in an area in which they live, where we can create more economic growth? So the idea is that we want to transform from within. We don't want to transform somewhere else and then bring people here, because that also enhances this idea of spatial apartheid, that those who are wealthy live closer to the means of capital. We want to expand it, but we also really have to support small businesses, particularly those that are women-led and youth-led and marginalized groups, because Kumama and Ugogo, who are selling fruits and vegetables on the side of the road, have been the hardest hit because they're in the informal sector. So I don't know if you remember, some months ago, there was a push to make them legal and have them permits, give them permits so that they could operate, because those people are breadwinners in their families, and it's not big money. Those people are living hand to mouth. So how do we support Umama and Ugogo, for example, around taking their business to the next level? How do we ensure that we can keep stock for a bit longer? How do we ensure that they can sell at a higher price? How do we support them to be able to economically change their lives? And that's a really big focus of what we're looking at now in Gauteng. And in fact, the strategy, if anyone is interested, I can also share it on social media. It's called Growing Gauteng Together, the 2030 plan. So the idea is, over the next 10 years, we want to create more economic opportunity for our people in multiple ways, but one that goes beyond just COVID. And I think my last point on this, Seth, the GDP numbers came out yesterday. Horrific stuff. Our GDP is contracted by minus 51%. Horrific stuff, yeah. But the benefit with the economy now being open, which is why government opened it, is we're expecting in the next quarter it will increase. So the point is, people have lost jobs. We lost over 3 million jobs, which is significant. But we're working day and night to ensure that we put money in the right industries to recreate those jobs. Those industries including agriculture, right? We look at the automotive industry and construction, because according to the stats, these three industries create the most amount of jobs. Doesn't mean we're not supporting the financial sector. It means these are our priorities, because we want to be able to create as many jobs as possible for our people. But it's a long uphill battle, and it's going to take us years to recover. And it's not just South Africa, it's almost every other country in the world. Australia also, for the first time, noted severe economic contraction also in their GDP. So it's not a good story, but we have to fight back, and we have to crawl one step or little bits at a time, but in a way that's just, in a way that's equitable, in a way that's sustainable.
Fasiha, it would be misgiving of me or misguiding if I didn't put this forward because we broadcast like this. So I don't mean to disrupt us further, but the reality is, people hearing about economic hardship, economic inequality, and the kind of grave reality of corruption in the country, how are you navigating, even in your early days now, within the legislature? How are you putting forward a brand, a courageous brand, as a woman, as a person of color, as an intergenerational leader, a younger person, coming into a culture where you're trying to get by off the back of coming with this resolve where you're already fighting economic injustice because of students. And now, in some ways, you may be meeting a status quo. This is how we did things, Fasiha. You new broom sweep clean. Let us put you straight. But how are you going to contend with that? And for people out there, I know like some folk are quite, it's kind of the pressure of this blanket of corruption is everywhere you look. And then when you hear like today, GDP, how are you navigating that space? And what can you say to us as South Africans?
I'm actually really glad you asked me this, because we have to speak more openly about what's going on, and we have to create a different and a new culture when it comes to corruption, which is one that it's not acceptable at all. So some of the practical things that I've already started doing in the legislature. The first thing is, we debated the COVID budget a few weeks ago, and I could also share on social media my speech, in which I called out the corruption. In which I sort of put forward a call to action to other MPs and MPLs that, corruption, yes, happens in the executive, yes, but we can't stand by and pretend that we don't have a role to play. And what I sort of said was along the lines of, I'm a young person, I come from a space where we fought on the streets to bring about access to education, and I would be doing a disservice to myself and to the millions of young people that I represent if I say nothing. Last week, I asked the Premier particular questions. What we have is what we call Premier's Question Time in the legislature, and it was actually broadcast live on all sorts of different news channels. And I can also post this, very specifically, very openly asked the Premier about the COVID corruption, about price fixing, and about what we're going to do in the long term to solve it. But it goes beyond that. It's about every single day. So today, for example, today we had a joint education and infrastructure meeting. It's about doing our job as public representatives, our oversight work, like when you have a fine comb and you're combing through something. The kind of attention to detail that we need, and that this is why I sleep at 3, 4 a.m. some nights going through these committee documents, because our job is to pick up on these things before it gets to the media, before it goes anywhere. We need to say,
come on, say that again.
Yeah. Why did you decide on this particular financial decision? How did you justify, starting to ask the tough questions from the very beginning. And that's something that I'm trying it is happening. I am pushing for it. But the thing, and this is the point, you can't just have one person or a handful of people doing it. We need to change the culture, and we need to take some very decisive and bold moves. And I say this on public platform. I said this internally to the ANC, and I'll continue to say it until people are held accountable, until we see things actually happening. Nothing will change, and our people will continue to lose faith in us. So you can trust that I'm saying it publicly to you, I'm saying it internally to the ANC, and I'm also making sure very clearly that this is not something I'm going to be a part of. And maybe we'll have a conversation, say 5-10 years from now, and it will be different. Maybe I'll have given up, maybe I'll be disillusioned. But right now, I strongly believe, and I firmly believe, that we have no other choice but to fight back. Because if we fold our arms, it's going to get worse, and people will think that it's okay, they'll get away with it. But if we fight back and we show them it's not acceptable on all levels, we'll create a different culture. So we have no other choice. And this may be it. This may be the thing that we were put in. You think of God's plan, right? Maybe this was the thing that we were forced to, or why we were put here. But it's a daily battle. I have to be honest with you. It's a daily one, and you have to be really switched on. And yeah, we have to be very transparent. So the last thing, if anyone knows of anything dodgy, please come and tell us what's going on, because sometimes we don't see those things. Those things don't come up on our radar. If you're not doing particular research, if you're not in a certain community every day, we're not picking up on things. And we also rely on our citizens and our people to be our eyes and ears where we can't be. So that's also the kind of culture we have to bring about.
So Fasiha, thank you for your time. I want to say to you, the documents that you made reference to, the speeches that you made, because I know you and I know your focus and your commitment to justice issues, in light of you not, in 5 years' time, not seeing you unraveling with disillusionment, I want to say to you, there are people out here that can support. We've got many platforms that are out there, so please share those resources with us, and we will put it out so people can see. Sometimes just to see a person actually having the courageous conversation, addressing people irregularly. And I want to encourage you out there, as Fasiha said today, it's not a perfect world. I'd like to tell you right now, I can only imagine what world she's having to deal with in the legislature. But just by us speaking this time, having this place, having community around us, we can go the distance. Something around economics that I've been paying attention to, and with some of the work I do at Gibbs, I'm looking forward to looking to it more intensely. The happiness index. So GDP as a gross domestic product, maybe we need a different measurement about the quality. So I may not need to live like the Joneses with 10 cars and 10 houses, but what will I need for the equality of human dignity, for the viability of my family, for the sustainable approach to life? And I'm hoping that people like Fasiha Hassan, and I'm hoping today, as you heard as well, that her work will encourage you and encourage us to continue. Like Fasiha, you just said, we have to fight, make the good fight. Fasiha, as we close out the show, because you've been in some way conversationally co-hosting with me, I'll give you the last word. From me, Seth Naika, thank you for being with us. Over to Fasiha to close out the show.
Yeah, I think also just to say thank you to everyone who joined us. Like you said, Seth, these conversations are fundamental. We can't just be making decisions in small, closed boardrooms. And, we need our communities to be fundamentally a part of it. And we need to work together because, you spoke about a new social compact in one of the books you're reading. That's exactly what we need. So thank you. And what I'll do is I'll leave my email address and other social media details perhaps with Seth. So if anyone wants to make contact, we can make good on what I've said, that here's a different culture. We really want to change things and we want to be inclusive and work together. So yeah, thank you. And thank you to you, Seth, for the opportunity. I know I am busy, but I'm really glad that we finally got the time and the chance to do this. So thank you.
Please keep in touch. Thank you for having coffee with me. I hope the conversation livened you up. Go on with the good fight, my dear friend, and know that we are not too far. Just a WhatsApp or telephone call away. Thank you, Fasiha. Bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good one.
So, friends, that was Fasiha Hassan. As I close out the show in such a time as this, let me bring you this quote. And I'd like you to, I'm going to step away from the screen just so that we can enjoy it just for a moment as I close the show. Check this out. I hope that 30-second silent moment gets you to take the conversation deeper. In such a time as this, when we think upon our heritage and our well-being, I can say to you today that I am a South African of African Indian heritage, and I know that part of the plight of my life is to make sure that all of our people in South Africa are having a blessed life, and all of our people around the world. So whatever you can do Fasiha Hassan today has inspired me by some of her own words. And as I just reflect on this, please pay attention to what she pointed you out to. Gauteng Together, the 2030 plan. If you don't know about it, go and check online. The speech that she made. I want to bring out those resources, and I promise you this, I will get that out. So if you are feeling there are people out there like Fasiha Hassan who feels a call towards social justice for such a time as this. From me, Seth Naika, I hope you have sensed that we have earned the privilege of your time. So wherever else this social media posts go, let it be a blessing to you all. Do good by your people. And like Fasiha said, keep up the good fight. Take care and see you next week. Bye for now.